here in person. I know we have this being televised too, so hopefully we have a bunch of folks watching at home, either live or viewing it at a later date. My name's Don Jameson. I was a former school committee member, chair, a couple of students that came through, music booster president, been involved. And I was kind of here at the inception of this scheduling committee. So that's why Mr. Nelson asked me to just kind of give you a brief history of kind of where it came from, and then he'll be coming up and giving you the presentation on what the committee did. So essentially what happened, probably a number of you know this, years ago the 4-block schedule was kind of the, the thing to do, longer class time, more in-depth. A lot of schools transitioned away from that. So the previous superintendent, Mr. Theoharides, had made the decision to go to 5 blocks in an effort to, kind of reinvigorate the arts, maybe give the students some more options. That decision at the time, he really didn't get the input from probably the staff and teachers that he should have. So we saw the result of that over the next couple years, which also entailed a move into this new high school. As beautiful as it is, it was a little stressful at the time. So of course the staff was dealing with that. So the issue came up again to the school committee, which I was the chair at the time, and the proposal to go back to the 4 blocks. That decision was made, and once again, I think a number of us involved felt that it was a little hasty. Maybe there wasn't the process that there should have been. It really didn't get vetted. But regardless, the decision was made. So after that, we decided what we really needed to do was to, like I said, have a process for it. Really look at it, take it from the ground up. We could have, by policy, the school committee really could just make the decision to change, which is kind of what happened the first couple times. But we didn't want to go that route. We decided we wanted to pull in like a representative from each of the stakeholder groups. So, pull in somebody from the, an instructor from the tech center, somebody from special ed, parents, school committee members, all the various people we could think of. Students was a big part. And then we've met over the last just over a year. A lot of time has gone into this. And you'll see that, I think, hopefully, through Mr. Nelson's presentation. I think he does a good job of laying it all out. And really the objective, I think, was to come in with no preconceptions, which I know it's hard to do that in theory, but we at least made the effort to, and kind of look at it from the ground up, say, hey, what do we want from a schedule? And I think I can speak for most of us. Like, the objective really was trying to do what's best for the students, try to come up with more opportunities for them, and with the understanding that, of course, you're dealing with a lot of different stakeholder groups and a lot of different demographics from the students. So, what might really work well for one student isn't going to work well for another student. And then on top of that, you layer in the fact that you've got the staff that you have to be concerned about. Because nobody through this process really wanted to put anything more on the staff than they had to, absolutely had to. So that was considered all the way through too. So what'll happen now, that kind of my little bit, Mr. Nelson's gonna come up, run through his breakdown of everything the committee went through. He's got some good detail in there. Then at the end, we're gonna have some time for some questions, really looking for clarification questions, not so much to get into the back and forth. He's got a good slide at the end with a timeline of how this process is gonna proceed from now on. And I just ask that everybody, just kind of stay respectful and understanding of the fact that, it does impact everybody differently. And it's also, it can be a very emotional topic. We're talking about, your kids' futures, talking to the parents and the staff, how this affects your job and everything that you have to deal with after everything you've dealt with for the last few years. So, Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Don. I think one thing I want to point out real quickly is when you start talking about a schedule, a high school schedule, as Don mentioned, that impacts many different stakeholders in many different ways. What may work for someone may not work for someone else. And so the challenges that you have with the schedule are something that is not unique to just Sanford. This is something that would be happening throughout. I always joke that if this process was easy and we were able to kind of find that perfect schedule and that solution, I would not be standing in front of you tonight. I'd be out on the lecture circuit making a lot of money, okay? Because scheduling is really challenging. And so we understand it can be an emotional issue, but I also think we've had a pretty good process to get us to this point. So the goal, just that first slide, if you look at it, there is, what you see there is like what may be a long winding road, and you don't know where you're headed. So that is kind of what we had put together as a slide, because we had done a lot of work. As Don mentioned tonight, what we're hoping to do is share the process and the work and the findings of our Schedule Advisory Committee. We really want to provide clarification. We want to be able to have an opportunity to answer questions. This is being recorded, and also the presentation will also be available for people, because it is in depth. If you want to come back and at a later time dig into that a little deeper, you're more than welcome to in looking at that. It's been a long road for us, well over a year. We had over 19 meetings. And so, as Don mentioned, one of the things that we were trying to do as we came together as a Schedule Advisory is really take the time to really go in and study things more in depth. So we started to try to do that with the idea of building a schedule up and assess what we really wanted a schedule to try to be able to do, what the goals were to try to accomplish that, and then also being able to be guided by what do we want to see in the schedule, and also what are some of the things that we don't want to see in a schedule either. As Don mentioned, we had a representative committee. That's the goal and the attempt. This was the advisory committee. Don, at the time when we started, was the chair of the school committee, and as you mentioned, a former parent and a community member. We also had Paula and Jen from the current school committee, also parents of children in the Sanford School Department as well. I was on the committee, Steve Boussier, assistant superintendent, Beth Lambert, our director of curriculum director, but also a former high school teacher, assistant principal, and also parent as well of students who had come and graduated. We had the principal of Sanford High School, Matt Peterman. We had the director of Sanford Regional Technical Center, Kathy Sargent. We had Beth Letourneau from the school counseling department, schedule extraordinaire, and you're welcome, and also a parent as well. We had Nick Erickson, a teacher, also a parent as well, and also representing the SFT. We did have students on the committee. John Paul is a student representative on the school committee, someone who felt very passionate about this all the way through, so he joined our committee. We also had Abigail and Aiden, also as other students, to try to be representative the best that we could of the student body. We also had James Harmon, an SRTC teacher, Alex Monroe, special education department, and a teacher, and also the department chair in that piece. As I mentioned, we met about 19 times. We started way back in August of 2021. At that first meeting is where we were reviewing the charge, identifying a timeline. And what you'll see up there was November 2022, in that we did have a timeline, because if we are going to be making a scheduling change, if that's the direction that we go, that information needs to be known in November so that we can start planning for that for the 2023-2024 schedule. And so that was something for us of identifying that to be able to kind of work backwards. With our meeting schedule, we tried to meet every 3 weeks or so, twice every 6 weeks. We did those meetings after school. We also did some of our meetings actually during Spartan time right here at Sanford High School. And as Dawn mentioned, one of the things that we were looking for there was, what are we looking for in a schedule? So if I bring up this link, you'll be able to see that some of the things that we were looking for in a schedule on those first meetings was realizing how difficult and challenging this was, how complex a process it was. We tried to make sure that we wanted to be representative of all students, not just particular specific groups if we could, looking at what benefits the most students, knowing that what may be a benefit for some students may not be a benefit for another. Looking at priorities, the impact on teachers, as Dawn mentioned, what is best for the various of the stakeholders. One thing that's important for us to realize at Sanford High School is we also work here with Sanford Regional Technical Center. We are a host CTE center for a number of sending schools, also in York County. So that's something else that is unique to our schedule that has to be a consideration for that. That we're not just looking at Sanford High School, we're also looking at Sanford Regional Technical Center in terms of doing that. And then also looking at what might be there for alternative avenues, a schedule with flexibility, but also realizing that sometimes it sounds really easy to do, but it can be very challenging when it comes to actually executing that in a master schedule point of view. So there's a lot of that for our committee looking at that. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't have any stakeholder groups that might be silent in doing that. And then also making sure that our schedule was going to be something that was going to help with student engagement in that for it. Okay. Our journey with that, we also started by looking at some of our past high school schedules that were worked. And as we look at that, we were trying to look at where we were going all the way back, I think, to 1996. And then also looking at, as Dawn mentioned, we were for many years a 4-block semester schedule. And what that means is you have four classes, four blocks that you have all for the first semester, and then halfway through the year you will switch. In many cases you'll be taking on 4 new classes. In looking at that. So we were trying to be able to understand the history of the schedule. One thing that I think is important as you look at that slide, we wanted to break down early on to kind of show how our students break out. And so in the class of integrated science, there are 3 levels to that. There's an honors level, a college prep level, and an applied level. And there's where you can see how that breaks down with sections. When we say sections, that would be a particular class, okay? Then we also broke that down for English 10 to see how it breaks down there in applied, college prep, and honors. And then we broke down civics. We were trying to be able to look at those classes from the different areas. It was hard to do that for math with the uniqueness of math. But there's how those things broke down in doing that. We also talked about the current schedule that we had at the time, where Wednesdays used to be part of what we had done through the schedule was Wednesdays had become an early release Wednesdays, where we got out early on Wednesdays. So what you saw at that time was Wednesday would always be a different schedule. And so what had happened with the current schedule, and I'll talk about where that was, where we now had a schedule that had 3 different schedules. You had a Monday, Friday schedule, a Wednesday schedule, and a Tuesday and a Thursday. And so one of the themes that came out was some consistency and simplicity when we were talking about those schedules going forward. One of the things we talked about was Spartan time. Spartan time is a time during the day that it's school-wide at that time, and that's where students will go to a particular advisory place, but that's their home base, but they're going to get scheduled out to then be able to, during that time, go see teachers of who they have for their classes, and where they might need some extra support, they might need some extra help to be able to do that. That was put in place originally as we were really looking at the proficiency-based movement, and it was something that we put in to help our people be able to make sure that they were achieving and reaching their standards. So knowing that we don't have the proficiency-based model, we did do a deep dive onto Spartan Time, and we spent time looking at that, really discussing that in depth to see its advantages, its pros and its cons. And so there was some of the work that we ended up doing that. We came to the decision that Spartan Time is of value and is of use, and that was going to be something that if we were building a schedule that we wanted to include Spartan Time. I know with the original schedule that we had prior to this year, there was no Spartan Time on Wednesday. And one of the feedback that we were getting from students and staff was that they wanted Spartan Time on Wednesday. So I know that we were trying to not have any more schedule changes because the staff had so many schedule changes that it was kind of like, hey, let's just kind of set with one and go. But we did, as a committee, studying that, relent to say that we were going to be able to add for this year a Spartan Time to the schedule on a Wednesday. And the original plan was it would be a shorter time, but that could be what could be used to help those people use that time to assign them to go to where they would be going to see their teachers to get that extra support and that extra help in doing that. Okay? So that was something that, as I mentioned, we did a deep dive on and decided that we wanted to continue with Spartan Time. We also studied credit requirements. We wanted to make sure what we had, our current graduation requirements for students to graduate from Sanford High School, what had been done in the past. We also studied the credit requirements for state, and then we also looked at York County schools. And I got a slide later on to go in that a little bit more. We also looked at lunch and studied the lunch schedules. And this is one of those things that the feedback that we were getting was hoping that lunch might be a little bit longer for students, but that's something that as you get into that and really peel that back and get into the different layers for that, that's very challenging. It's not as easy as it sounds for us to be able to make sure that you can have a school of over 1,000 students and be able to work through that to get them all fed so that we're not starting lunch too early or having it be too late either. But we also realize that there might be opportunities to increase lunch. It may not be what some people had wanted, but it may have been something that even a few extra minutes could be helpful in that situation. We also realized that for some people, a longer lunch is important, but maybe not for all of our students. Some of our students, depending on lunch, that can be a difficult time for them. So also trying to realize what we were trying to find was the appropriate time to make sure that people could make sure that they could eat and get their lunch with that. So that was something we also looked at. Also, as we went down the journey, we looked at what we had for the current visual and performing arts opportunities. We reviewed our electives, what was offered. The committee felt that one of our concerns was there was not enough offerings to engage all level of learners. We also spent a meeting looking at technical education, reviewing SRTC program requirements, current format. We also discussed those options for earning credit outside of a Sanford High School schedule. So if there are opportunities where people don't have the ability to take those classes, there were some other opportunities, whether that's at York County Community College through the Odyssey Ware program and AP for Me. We were able to look at those. We also did a deep dive into our advanced placement courses. We realized that, and when you're talking about advanced placement courses, those do have an impact on the schedule. They're usually talking about not a large number of students, but also realizing that for us, Sanford teaches advanced placement courses all year long. So I mentioned there was a semester block that people would have 4 classes, and then at the semester they would change to 4 new ones. If you had an advanced placement course, that would run all year. So we did something with that to really dig into AP. We continued our journey, and we also were able to look at sports and after-school activities. We looked at late arrival for students and early release for students who qualified for that. One of the things the high school had used in the past was a 0-block offering, where for some students, this was a class that was offered before school, before the regular first period for some students. And then we also were able to look at after-school offerings for that. And then the schedule that we have now, we went from 5 blocks to a 4-block schedule with an enrichment period, an enrichment class, 2 days a week with that. And so we also were able to take a time to look at the enrichment blocks and how that's able to work. We, at one time, they were also referred to as the skinny blocks as we were taking our notes, because they're not what would be a regular block. They're a skinny block that would meet 2 times a week to be able to do that. And they're offered on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the end of the day, meeting twice a week. The students would earn a quarter credit. That would be an elective credit, and that would be a class, those are graded as pass-fail. And doing that, they're semester long. Since they're pass-fail, they do not count for GPA. And then we have, there would be students who did have early release that would not be coming back for the early block, and the expectation that all of our teachers would be teaching in the enrichments. And so there were some positives that we're able to look at in doing that. And then we also looked at some things that could be some negatives about that. And then we also talked about ways to be able to try to look and improve that. All right, so that was some of the work that we did there. We also, as I mentioned, did a pretty deep data review. One thing that I think is important was back in 2017, 2018, that is the last time that we had, that's when we had a 5-block schedule. And then 2021, 2022, last year is where we were working on the schedule of 4 blocks and the 2 enrichment classes. And so we really wanted to look at that as far as courses, levels, and enrollment. And so as you look at that data review, you can see back in 2017 and 18, that's when we had the semester block, 4 periods. Our enrollment at that time was 991. And then in the various, there are certain parts of a schedule, this is what we would have for students in there and what would turn out to be a percentage in doing that, okay? And we wanted to, hold on. And then you move over to 2018 and 19. That was the first year we went to the 5-block schedule. We had an enrollment of 1,018 students, and that's how some of those things broke out there. As we did a deep dive into that, we move over to 2019, 2020. That was also a 5-block schedule, and that was 5 by 5, and that was a enrollment of 1,068. 2020, 2021 was when we were in the midst of COVID. So that year we went back to a 4 by 4. Originally it was supposed to be the 4 blocks plus the 2 enrichments, but where we were with COVID, At the time, the decision was made to keep it a 4x4 block with 1,057 students. Last year, we did go to the 4x4 with the enrichment blocks 2 days a week, and that was with 1,059 students. And as I mentioned, people have the ability to dig into this deeper. I don't want to spend us all night digging into that. But I do think it's important that back when we had a 5-block schedule in 2018, 2019, we had, as far as teaching staff, we had core teachers of 45 and a half. When I'm talking about core teachers, those would be your English, math, science, social studies, and science teachers. The elective teachers, those would oftentimes be your foreign language, your phys ed, your health, and whatnot. We have 12 of those teachers, and we had an enrollment of 1,018. And then if you look at this current year, we have 48 teachers, but 5 of them are being funded with ESSER funds, which are in place to allow us to be able to have smaller class sizes to help us with educational recovery. Elective teachers, we have 11, 2 of them are with ESSER, but our enrollment has gone up to 1,090. So I'll come back to that a little bit later, because when we are talking about a 5-block schedule, one of the things we want to make sure about is that we have staff. We have the appropriate staffing to be able to come back and cover that, to make sure that it can operate. As I mentioned, we did look at York County, other high schools. We looked at their daily bell schedule, their semester or year-long classes. We looked at their graduation requirements, minimum credits needed to take each year, as well as advanced placement and their prerequisites. And so as we come back on this, we were looking at Biddeford. Biddeford has changed recently. They've gone up to 5 credits, 5 blocks, as I mentioned, but their graduation requirements have increased to 30. Okay, and they did that during the pandemic and have kept that. You also look at the graduation credit requirements over here on the right. Then you can look at Marshwood, MSAD 35, 21 credits to graduate. They are on a year-long, for a year-long course, 1 credit, but they have 6 courses per semester that are semester-long, and they have some courses that are every other day. Noble, SAD 60, 23 and a half credits to graduate. And you can see there, they're on a semester long. Some are every other day. They have 6 courses per semester that are mandatory. And if you're a senior, it's 5. And your core classes are year long. Old Orchard Beach, RSU 23, 22 credits to graduate. They have a schedule that's every other day. That means their blocks meet every other day. Sanford, we have 25 credits to graduate. If you are in a year-long course for us, the AP courses that are a year, those would be 2 credits. And you see the links that are in there to the Daily Bell schedule, the program of studies, and our enrichments there. York, 24 credits to graduate. They do an every other day, 4 blocks every other day. Kittery is a smaller school in York County, Trape Academy. They're very much still, they've gone all in on the proficiency based. So they have 4 blocks every other day. MSAD 6, Bonnie Eagle, 24 credits to graduate. They are on a trimester schedule where they have 5 blocks. And if there's a core class, they have to meet at least 2 trimesters. RSU 21 in Kennebunk, 24 credits to graduate, 4 blocks, alternating block every other day. Massabesic has 6 blocks, and core classes are year long. Wells Agunquit, 24 credits to graduate, and they are on trimesters as well. As I mentioned, we did a deep dive into the advanced placement courses that were offered in the time frames. So there you can see what Biddeford offers and the grades that they offer those. Biddeford offers their AP classes for a full year where they meet every other day. MSAD 35, they meet for a full year every other day. Noble, SAD 60, full year every other day. Old Orchard Beach, full year every other day for 1 credit. Sanford meets full year every day for 2 credits. York meets full year every other day for 1 credit. Not sure about Kittery, and we mentioned Bonnie Eagle AP courses. Those are 3 trimesters for 1.5 credits in doing that. Kennebunk every other day. Massabesic 2 experiences equal 1 credit, and Wells equals 3 trimesters and 2 credits. So we did dig into that. We then were really, as we mentioned, what we were zeroing in on for our committee was what do we need in a schedule, what do we want in a schedule, and what can't we have in a schedule. So that was something that we also asked the same 3 questions. We did that to students to get their feedback. That was done in during a Spartan time and a circle activity, and then we also asked the staff, our teachers, also during an early release day. And so if you look at the students' feedback, we tried to do our best to summarize that. As you can tell, for some people it may be tomato, for someone else it may be tomato. It's coming back into where there's differences and all of that. And there's our student feedback. Things they needed in a schedule, the things they wanted in a schedule, and some of the things that they couldn't have in a schedule. And what we did there is try to take what we could were the themes that were coming back from what would have been the full feedback, which is here. And then you can see that also was all, we tried to condense all of what we had there to take that back. So you'd have some situations where people would be in favor of something, and then there'd also be situations where they would not be in favor of that same thing. So there's the feedback that we had there on students. And then we also did the same thing in the staff. Here's our staff full feedback. I'll try to get that to 125. That's going to be tough for people to be able to see that. But things we need in a schedule, things we want in a schedule, I'll go up and try to bring that down just a bit. And then you can see those are all the feedback that we went through, all of the things that came in. And then we did our best to try to see what themes had emerged as far as a summary. And the same things we need in a schedule, things we want in a schedule, things we can't have in a schedule with that. Okay? As I said, these will be available for people. I know I'm going a little bit fast, but in the interest of time, I'm more about kind of helping people understand our process of what we were looking for. So then we broke it down and now started to have the nitty-gritty about schedules. And so we looked at the different options, building them up to kind of see what those are that we wanted. We looked at what would have been the semester, what a 4-block schedule would look like in the semesters. And then you can see that with the early release Wednesday, that time would be a little bit different. But then you could be able to see how long the classes would be. And in those situations, you're looking at over 70-minute classes. Okay. And then we did a deep dive into those, looking at the pros and the cons of the semester block schedule. And you can see those there. And then we also looked at 4 blocks with an enrichment, semester long. That's our current schedule. So we did, looking at that, you can see that Monday and Fridays, here is your schedule. Wednesday, the early release day schedule. And then Tuesday and Friday is when you do have the enrichments. You can see those right there. That would be taking place for 50 minutes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we also went through and did a deep dive on those as far as pros and cons to those. Then other schedules that we looked at were 4 blocks. You notice that a number of schools in York County have the 4 block every other day. So what that means is you would have 4 classes on what would be a red day, and then you'd have 4 different classes on a white day, and those would alternate every other day. Okay, so you'd have a alternating schedule, and so you'd look there that the classes would be 70 minutes. We also included a Spartan time in there where you could see how that would work. That's how the lunches would work, and then you'd see where the block 4 class was. So that in that schedule would have classes 70 minutes. The last block would be 5 minutes longer to accompany for dismissal. And so we went through there of also looking at some pros and cons of that schedule, of that particular schedule, digging into that. Then we looked at a 5-block semester schedule. And so I'll try to get that up. A little bit more with that. And the 5-block is a little bit different than the one that we'd had previously because there were some challenges with that schedule, especially around Wednesdays or early release days. So in this particular model, we have a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule where you see blocks 1, 2, 3, and 4, and block 5 would meet. And you notice on that schedule the instructional time, those are minutes, and so you'll notice on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday that the minutes there for block 5 are more, 300, because they're not going to meet on Wednesdays, the early release day. And so then if you look at the Wednesday schedule for the other blocks 1, 2, 3, and 4, you add up those times, and then you'll see where we'll be landing for those minutes at the end of the week. So it may not work on a daily situation, but there's a block 5 on Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and that block 5 would be for 75 minutes. Okay, then we also looked at a 6-block schedule for semesters, and that's where you would see the schedule there. Those blocks would be right around 56 minutes, 55, 56 minutes. And then you'd also see there lunches 25 minutes and lunches in block 4. And then a block 5 class and a block 6 class. And you can see there we look through pros and cons of this particular schedule. And then another option that we looked at was getting away from what the block schedule would be and looking at 8 blocks. And those would be year long, okay? So this is a model that there are some schools that use that where these classes would be 40-minute long and broken into mods, mods being 20 minutes. And what that would do is there's some classes that might need more time than 40 minutes. For an example, labs in your science classrooms, for example. And so that's how you would break that down to go into periods 1, 2, 3. We still kept a Spartan time in there. and periods 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. In essence, 16 mods throughout the day. So we did go through there with pros and cons to be able to look at that particular schedule. And then that brought us, as we did our work and dug deeper, we looked at the committee, eliminated the 6 blocks and the 8 blocks schedule. The 6 blocks, the concern was that there'd be too short of class time per semester, but it wouldn't be enough time for year long. In the 8 block schedule, we also saw lunches too short, how to accommodate the labs, and we also were concerned about the transitions. So then discussion continued, and as after to those 4, we then landed on our current schedule, 4 blocks with enrichments, and also a 5 block schedule. And so that was something there where we did a deeper dive with that. So I just want to bring that schedule back up so people can really take some time to really focus in on this. This is our 4 block with enrichment, the current schedule. So there's what you would have on Mondays and Fridays. There's what you would have on Wednesday, the early release day. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, you would have those enrichments. So you're probably asking yourself, what is an enrichment? Okay? And so just some of the samples. Remember, these are courses that are a quarter credit. They're a semester long. They're elective courses. And so a part of this was being able to allow our teachers to also be able to teach something that was interesting to them, passionate about, that they could be passionate about some of the other electives, to be able to increase those options. And so here's just an idea of some of the ones that we've had. Everything from sports and statistics, theater production, design a small cabin, creative writing and poetry, a school newspaper, yoga, woman in science, unified fitness. There's a number of options that are coming in to be able to do that. The other thing that was important for these enrichment courses also was it's an opportunity for especially our grade 9 and 10 students to also get an introduction to some of the CTE and the SRTC courses. And so that's an opportunity for them that if I'm going to be applying to SRTC and getting accepted, many of those programs are 2-year programs and they take up half your day. They take up 2 periods. And so session 1 is in the morning, that is first year, mostly juniors. Session 2 is afternoon for 2 periods. And so in doing that, we also wanted an opportunity for people to be able to have an introduction to that, to be able to use that also as an enrichment opportunity. Some people, it could be used to find out, yes, absolutely, I'd really love to continue into this. In some situations, it might be the decision to made to say, I appreciate the experience, but I am not going to go to be able to continue that. So that's where you're looking at the 4 blocks with enrichments. You had seen the blocks before is where you would have your core classes and your electives, and then enrichments would be here, some of the samples. Okay? And then the other schedule that we landed on was a 5 block schedule. And you can see there, as I've already mentioned about that schedule, that block 5 would meet Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday for 75 minutes a day for a total of 300. Block 5 would not meet on Wednesday. Your other 4 blocks would meet every day, and there's where you'd be able to see your classes and your total minutes to be able to do that. We then broke it down and tried to really look at what we would have for pros and cons. And I want to point out that this is difficult because what may be a pro for someone could be a negative for someone else. And so this is challenging, that we were trying to do our best to try to keep things back to some of those things that could be measurable and data driven to be able to do that. For the negatives to a 5 block schedule, one of the important ones is it's going to be another prep and additional students added to teachers. And there's That's obviously a big concern. There also was a concern that when we were back to a 5-block schedule, our failure rates increased. We had situations prior to back in the 5-block schedule, kids feeling overwhelmed. This is prior to COVID, and now that's only increased as we've come out of COVID or coming out of COVID. And then also executive functioning skills are lacking to be able to take more on. Concerned about academic burnout. Another big one is con is less instructional time. That would be less instructional time for our SRTC and also less instructional time for the Sanford High School courses as are compared to right now in doing that. Fewer staff each block for duties, and as I mentioned about the 5-block, one of those things is staffing concerns. And so one of the things that we've asked to do is we've asked the high school to really dig into trying to do their best to replicate what would a 5-block schedule look like with our current demographics and our current numbers that we have for Sanford High School currently. And that's challenging because as we try to look into our program, that's something that we're finding is just not easy for us to roll over. So that's something that we're trying to be able to dig into that, to be able to say, okay, if we are adding an additional block, that means for our teachers, that's 2 additional blocks that each teacher would be able to go back and add out through the year. And so we want to make sure that by doing that, it's also going to be able to be in a situation that could support our enrollment to do that. When we look at the negatives to a 4-block within Richmond, it was, and for SRT, I want to go back to the negatives for the 5-block. That was also something where for SRTC that was challenging for them to offer those classes for an entire semester. You may have someone who takes a 5-block, a 5th block, kind of an intro class, and then they kind of realize this isn't really for me. That engagement piece is not there, and that can be challenging. Negatives to 4 blocks with enrichment. In some ways, what that does would be limit opportunities for some students. That you'd have 70-minute classes all day for 2 days a week. And then in the 5-block schedule, you'd have 1 class for 75 minutes, 4 days a week. Talking about the length of classes. Enrichment blocks lack some academic rigor. There's inconsistency in the workload, expectations, and purpose. Concerns about the last 15 minutes of classes and where students are with engagement. Current schedule doesn't allow for special education teachers to push into mainstream classrooms. Whereas if there was a 5th block schedule, that could have increased opportunities there. Concern about the substance. I mentioned you saw where the courses were meeting for a quarter credit 2 days a week. And then also what the current pass-fail format does. And then also the idea in a 4-block with enrichment, if there was some opportunities for freshman teaming. What we mean by freshman teaming would be that is when a group of teachers would be meeting with their group of students on a team. So if you're on that team, you'd have the same 4 core teachers. If you're on the other team, you'd have also the same, a different 4 core teachers to be able to do that. And then also, there are a number of students that are opting out of the enrichment block. So those were some of the negatives that we looked at there. In terms of positives, we were looking at more opportunities, academic opportunities, and flexibility. That could be in situations where for some band students, chorus students, art students, students who are interested in foreign language, special education students, our advanced placement students. Also a positive to a 5-block is it may provide opportunities for students to have early release or late arrival. Also, there may be opportunities there for some extended learning opportunities outside of the school year with work or with some Job Corps. Also, you may have students who would like to have a study hall, and that could be easier for students in a 5-block rather than a 4-block. And then also a positive to a 5-block is if you have students that are looking for math to reach our highest level of math by being able to do a semester block you'd be able to also have more opportunities to be able to do that. I want to mention that some of these could be pros for 5, but they could also be pros for 4 and vice versa. Some of the positives for a 4 block with enrichment. Difficult to offer electives for all of our students, especially in that area of those students that are not honors, AP, or college prep. And by having those electives, that's something where those enrichment courses be able to do that. It does allow students to experience different SRTC courses to see if that's something they want to continue with. The enrichments, there's lower pressure for those, and they also, enrichments allow our staff to teach something different, something new, and something they'd also look to enjoy. So out of our committee members, remember we were trying to be able to zero in. Those were the 2 that we had, that we came into. And so we did another survey with those 2 to try to do a first and second choice on the remaining 2 schedules. And what we came through with the committee was there was not one unanimous choice that evolved from us. There were some people that very much were looking at interested in a 5-block schedule, and then there were other members on the committee that were also looking at the 4-block with enrichments. And so we're at a situation there where, to stick to our November timeline, that was something that we came in and we presented in a workshop to the school committee, a very similar presentation to what you've just had tonight. We were able to give that to the school committee. From that meeting, it was decided that we very much wanted to provide an opportunity for stakeholders to also, being parents and students and teachers and staff, to be able to have an opportunity to also see what our process was, to look at that. And then in terms of next steps, coming back, we have the school committee meeting that was originally scheduled for next Monday, November 7th. That has been postponed and rescheduled to the following Monday, November 14th. And so part of that was, I think the fall athletic awards night is on Monday the 7th. And so we want to make sure that our stakeholders have an opportunity to be able to receive this information, look at this information, and then if there's any public comment or any feedback or thoughts that people want to share with us, there'll be opportunities to do that at the Monday, November 14th school committee meeting. Those school committee meetings are done both in person, but they're also done where it's via Zoom. And that will not be a night that the school committee will be taking action. What I'll be doing, I anticipate, is show this presentation. I'll be doing probably a similar condensed one at that school committee meeting. It'll be an opportunity for public comment. Also, between now and the meeting, there will be the schoolinfo@sanford.org. That's a line where if anybody has any thoughts that they want to be able to come back, share on the schedule for the school committee to hear, that's an opportunity to do that. We'd ask them to send those prior to 4 p.m. on the 14th if they want to be talked about at the 14th. Then the following Monday on the 21st is where there'll be our second school committee meeting in November. That's at 6 o'clock, once again in person or Zoom. And at that one, the plan would be that the school committee would have that as an agenda item to take action. That action could be that, I don't want to speak for the school committee, but it could be looking at maintaining the current schedule that we have, with the 4 blocks with the enrichments, or it could be making a change to a 5-block class. It could be changing to another model. I don't think that will happen, but it's a possibility. But I also know that they also may want to come back and either take more time with that. So that's kind of the options laid out. And the school committee also will be there'll be an in-person there for more public comment. If people have some thoughts to come back in terms of that they want to share Those will be done at that meeting also on the 21st, and people can also send those to the through the school info line before that, because we want opportunities for people. Tonight, it's more about presenting the information to you. Tonight is not more about coming back to hear as much public comment, but there is an opportunity for us to make sure that if people do have some questions or things that might have to be clarifications. I know that was difficult as I was able to try to go through that. As I mentioned, we will make this available on our website for people that want to come down and be able to dig into the work. I think what you can see is a lot of work has gone into this. We've done our best to try to sit back and consider all different perspectives. You can see what may be advantages or pros in one situation. Also might be looked at advantage or pros, and some of the negatives might be looked upon as a pros for some of the students. It's not easy, as we're come back and try to find out what we can do to be able to come back and help our students with that. We have a number of people who are on the Schedule Advisory Committee. Any comments from them? Anything I might want to speak to or needs to be clarified? We do have an opportunity for questions. We do have to help this out with the people who are watching at home and also the people who will be watching on recording. We do have a microphone down here on the far aisle, so that if you come down to ask a question, that way people at home will also be able to hear the question, and we'll do our best to try to answer that if people have that. So opportunity now for questions or clarification as we look at that.
I have a couple of questions. What issues or deficiencies drove this study? You didn't kind of cover why you're actually doing this to begin with. My second question, you didn't post any information on how the enrichments have benefited students in their career choices or in their doing better in other courses. So what research have you done on that? Thank you.
Sure. So I think we did our best initially when Dawn had talked about the process that had got us to a schedule change initially, going from the 4-block semester block schedule, that the decision was made to go to 5 blocks. There was some concern about that, so the decision was made to go to the 4 blocks with the 2 enrichments. And then there was an opportunity where there were still some thoughts where there were people who wanted more options or more flexibility, and so that was something that the school committee came back to say, time out, let's not keep changing, let's take some time to really do a deep dive onto this particular issue, study it in depth, bring that information on. So I think that the hope would be that we'd be able to settle on a schedule and do one that we can be able to go back and stay with, so that there wouldn't be the changing and things coming back to go around. I think that's a big issue of what we were looking for with the particular committee. And then in terms of the enrichments, in terms of how they have been able to benefit students when it comes back to career choices, not a lot of information is done to be able to do that. We've only had that schedule. It was supposed to have it during our COVID year. We went to the 4-block. Last year was the first year that we had done that. So it's so in that situation, we probably haven't come up and done a lot of getting in information with that to see how that may have lined up with people's career choices and doing that. I think one of the challenges is there are limitations. Some people feel there are limitations to the enrichments. Also, where if you had a 5-block class, could you still have some of those enrichment opportunities, but also in situations where people could be taking a class and getting more opportunities for those classes to be able to do that. Not the quarter credit, would be a full credit in looking at that. So, other questions?
Hello, that was a very awkward walk, I'm sorry. Was the committee able to look at any data regarding the music department in terms of the enrollment and how the classes might work in these different schedules? It was clear on those charts that the numbers went down drastically every year, just like other groups did as well. So I was just wondering if there was any data that was looked at for those courses.
Sure. I'll say that the walk isn't as long as you sit near the front next time, okay? I think you saw some of the data up there that we were able to kind of look back at what the schedules had when we had the different models and what we had for band students there. And then the idea of over the different schedules. I think the thought process is if we added a fifth block, you may have people who are interested in participating in band, continuing in band, now that they have an opportunity for them to be able to have another option, another period to be able to do that, as opposed to maybe I had to make a choice, because when you only have 4 blocks in the schedule, you have less choices than you would if you had 5 blocks. So I think that's probably an assumption that people have made in terms of looking at an opportunity that would benefit students who are interested in the music.
Great. Thank you.
Difficult work, really challenging. And one of the things I want to look back on is I really want to give our committee, I really want to praise our committee. We sat there, as I mentioned, we mentioned 19 times, and we also had some meetings that were some marathon meetings. And that's for us to be able to come back, because we're trying to be able to find a schedule that's going to be able to come back to be what can benefit students, benefit our staff and our teachers, and try to benefit the most in those situations, because there's going to be, as I mentioned, that's where the challenging work is, because some people may look at it as a pro. For them, from their particular viewpoint, it may be a pro regardless of what schedule it is, but then there also may be the negatives or the cons to it. And that really comes back to make it challenging. Our hope here is that we've done work that we can be able to, that we've shared, to be able to come back. I encourage people to look at it and also provide us with our feedback, because as much as our committee, and I'm proud of our committee and feel it was representative, there may be some things too that we could come back and possibly missed or not be aware of. And that's where we need people to come back to be able to offer thoughts or feedback for us to be able to make sure as we go back, because you're going to have a decision regardless of, as you can see, what schedule we have. There's going to be in some situations where that's going to work for students, and then there's going to be other situations where it may not work as well. And so that's where and we know it's an emotional issue. We know that that's something that people care about. That's a good thing, but I hope that we can also make sure that people can remain passionate but also civil, as we all know that we're all working towards trying to have the betterment of all of our students in terms of everything that we can offer here in the Sanford School Department for that. We will put we'll put this onto the website so that people can come in. I know it's fast in terms of trying to give you an overview, at least the process, and then you can dig down into some of that information. Any final questions? I will be available afterwards if there's people who have individual questions that they're not comfortable with, maybe coming back onto in front of the group or being recorded. But I will be available for people who are interested in those. Sound good? On behalf of myself, but also of the school committee, and on behalf of our advisory committee for the schedule, thank you for coming and showing the interest. And if there are anything that people have, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.